Good afternoon and welcome to the 635th meeting of the Economic Club of New York in our 114th year. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. As many of you know, the Economic Club of New York is the nation's leading nonpartisan forum for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. We feel our mission today is as important as ever as we continue to bring people together as a catalyst for conversation and innovation. Over the past year, through our diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, we've been leveraging the club's platform to bring together prominent thought leaders to help us explore and better understand the various dimensions of racial inequity and highlight strategies, best practices, and resources that the business community can use to be a force for change. We're not doing this work alone, and we'd like to give special thanks to our corporate partners, BlackRock, Bloomberg, MasterCard, M&T Bank Wilmington Trust, PayPal, S&P Global, and Taconic Capital, as well as the many members, speakers, and subject matter experts that are now and will be engaged in this work as we go forward. A special welcome to members of the ECNY 2021 class of fellows, a select group of diverse, rising next-gen business thought leaders, as well as students from the Campbell School of Business at Fordham, Rutgers University, NYU, and the CUNY Graduate Center. And just a note, the 2022 application for the Fellows Program is now available online. It's a pleasure for me to welcome our special guest today, Jonelle Procope, President and CEO of the Apollo Theater in Harlem, New York. During her tenure as president of the theater, she led a team of 50 full-time employees and as an executive team responsible for all the operating and strategic functions of the legendary theater. During this period, she also led the successful Apollo Rising Capital campaign to restore the theater, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that, focused on the long-term stability of the organization in particular. She's overseen the Apollo's transformation into a vibrant, not-for-profit performing arts organization by increasing its base of support, expanding its educational offerings and community programs, and creating large-scale artistic initiatives. Today's program will be a conversation, and we're very fortunate to have Charles Phillips, club trustee and co-founder and managing partner of Recognize. For this event, we're going to be very interactive and we're going to use the chat box. So if you enter questions directly into the chat box for consideration, our interviewer will try to use them, or I can jump in at the end if needed. We're going to end promptly at 12:45 p.m. And as a reminder, this conversation is on the record and we do have media on the line today. So without further ado, Charles, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Charles Phillips. I'm the co-founder and managing partner at Recognize, which is a technology growth fund for private equity. And spent my career in technology, but I'm also a trustee of the Economic Club of New York. But more importantly, right now, I've also been on the board of the Apollo Theater since 2015. And in December 2020, Jonelle convinced me to become chairman of the Apollo, which I am now, and proudly so. So I'm honored to introduce you to Jonelle Procope, who's a good friend, longtime friend as well, the president and CEO of the Apollo, who I will be speaking with today.
Thank you, Charles. Oh, okay.
That's great. Great.
I just want to say thank you. And I want to thank Barbara for inviting me to address the Economic Club today. It's a real honor. And I'm so happy to be able to talk to you, Charles, in this forum, because we are normally sitting around a table at an Apollo board meeting. So this is going to be fun.
Certainly will be. So we have a lot of people on the call who are hearing your name or meeting you for the first time. So let's start with you first. Share your trajectory, how you got here, what brought you to this work, how did you end up as, chairman, as president and CEO of the Apollo Theater, and where'd your interest come from?
Well, I'm going to go back to my formative years. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I had a much older brother and his wife who lived in New York. And I used to come up to New York and spend summers with them and worked in their office. My brother at the time was publisher of the Amsterdam News, the New York Amsterdam News. And that office was right around the corner from the Apollo. So that was my first experience with the theater. And at that time, there were theaters like the Apollo all across the country in urban areas where you could go and see music groups. So I was able to go to the Apollo and just fell in love with it. But more than that, I fell in love with the culture of New York City and just there was always something going on. So I knew this is where I wanted to live. So fast forward, I came up to New York. I'm a lawyer by training. And at the time I was working in the entertainment field, and the Apollo, this is back in 1999, the Apollo was, it's really had a very interesting history, lots of transformation, lots of changes. And at that time, there was a new group of people coming onto the Apollo board, and it was led by Dick Parsons, who was, as you know, the chair. You succeeded. Dick was the chair of the Apollo for 20 years. And I was asked to be on the Apollo board. At that time, the Apollo was really languishing. It was, if you rode down 125th Street, it looked as though the theater was dark. There was nothing happening. There was scaffolding on it. So again, it was a real turnaround situation. And so we just began to dig in. And one of the first things that we did was to commission an engineering report. And it was enough to make our hair stand up because we saw that there was much to be done. But one of the major things that we knew we needed to do was to begin the work of renovating the theater. Because if you looked at the theater, our marquee and blade sign were in disrepair, and it just felt like the theater was closed. So we did that, and that we thought was a signal to the community that the Apollo was open and back. And, the Apollo has always been a beacon for the Harlem community and 125th Street. So I think that was an important thing. And then from that, that work that we did on the board, Dick asked me, would I consider coming into the theater to run it? And that's how I ended up in this role, which is, it's been 18 years. I can't believe it.
And kind of compare and contrast today versus then, because it's changed so much in terms of the types of programming, number of tourists coming, and just give people a sense of the enormous transformation that you created.
Sure. Well, let me just start with the fact that the Apollo has a remarkable legacy, and I think that many people probably are familiar with it, but it opened its doors in 1934. And at that time, it was one of the first non-segregated theaters that permitted people of color, as well as in the audience, as well as on the stage. And it introduced a new format of programming, which was the varieties show. So it became a place of opportunity, a place where artists could come and hone their skills. And so it introduced just pretty much anyone who dealt with music or comedy or theater or dance to the public. And these people became legends, like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday, the big bands. I mean, really anyone who performed in that era. So when I think about that, the Apollo was a place of opportunity. And so throughout the years, that's been a constant in the Apollo's history, if you will. So when I took over the reins of the theater, The only thing that we had going on was Amateur Night, which is one of our signature programs, and began when we opened in 1934. So that launched the careers of some of the more contemporary artists, because at the time they didn't have an opportunity to play in some of the major mainstream venues. It took, I would say it's just been in the last 10 years that we've really focused on a different type of programming. There's a lot of arts programming that takes place at the Apollo today. I'm a big proponent of collaboration. We have collaborated with some interesting organizations. The one that probably is something that people wouldn't think about is the Philadelphia Opera, for example. And people, when they think of the Apollo, they say opera. Why would there be opera at the Apollo? But what we did was we introduced operas that you wouldn't see in the mainstream. For example, we did Yardbird, which was a story of Charlie Parker. So that has significance to the African-American community and the community at large. And it's a story about, a really famous musician. It introduced another genre to the community. I thought that was important. And a lot of the performers were performers that the Harlem community would never have seen. So I thought that was a wonderful thing to do. We did another opera, and this is, in a sense, this opera was art meets activism. It was called We Shall Not Be Moved, which was an opera detailing the story of a civil rights issue in Philadelphia with an organization called MOVE. Let me go back to sort of the beginning of my tenure. When the Apollo, when we first embarked on this journey to revive it, if you will, it really was languishing, and the board needed help. It needed to, we needed to bring more people on. We needed to develop it so that it could help us to, accomplish the goals that we had to turn the organization around. And in that particular time frame, and this is again around 2003, I would say 2003 to 2010, people came onto the board more as a favor to Dick and to me. And I think that they came onto the board feeling as though they were helping the organization survive. And then we began to internally focus on the team, the professionals in the important positions in a not-for-profit, development, fundraising, marketing, financial, help for the organization. And so we began to be able to attract really the best and the brightest in these positions. And that allowed us to begin to focus on the more, fun things like the programming. And so we began to introduce new programming. And when I think about the Apollo being a place of opportunity, that's what we are today. We are focused on creating a safe space, a home for new artists who want to push the boundaries and introduce programming and work that they're passionate about, but they need a place where they can work and feel that they can have an exchange of ideas and incubate their works. I'm going to stop and let you ask some more questions.
Jonelle, I'm always surprised at some of the artists when I learn about their background, how they got their start at the Apollo, current artists. So we both were at the her concert recently. H.E.R. She's one of the most popular R&B artists in the world right now. Think of her as they call her the female Prince. She plays every instrument, creates music. So just amazing. And the reason she was there, I had midway through, she announced to us, well, I got my start when I was 9 years old because the Apollo, actually looked at my video and returned my call, and I came the amateur night, and the rest is kind of history. And so that happens more often than you'd think. Lauryn Hill, D'Angelo, a lot of current artists are still performing. So let's turn to the art form. If you look forward for the kind of next couple of years, and we talk about this new American canon you want to build and all the intersections you've been describing, what are some of the things you're excited about, different types of things you're planning going forward?
So what you're referring to is the fact that we really want to, culture is our operating system. We really feel the Apollo has the power to transform and build community, and to really be a testing board for African-American artists and artists of the African diaspora. And so, again, we look for opportunities to work with artists like Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, he may seem as though he's a writer, and he's a collaborator, and he has amazing ideas. And he was our first artist in residence, master artist in residence. So in 2018, we commissioned, produced, and adapted his award-winning book, Between the World and Me. And it's one of the many productions that we've launched that illustrates the intersection of arts and activism and addresses issues that face us all, like inequality, particularly in the Black community. So Between the World and Me was on the Apollo stage back in 2018 and really critically acclaimed. It premiered there, and then it toured to the Kennedy Center in Washington, and then down to Atlanta. And we had planned for a much broader tour season, and then the pandemic hit. We think this work is an example of what we consider the 21st century canon of work that focuses on the African-American narrative. And by this, I mean work that will maybe begin at the Apollo, but then travel to other cities and other venues, and will be referred to in years to come. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful example of what we would like to see, and when we develop this canon. The work, because of the pandemic and because we could not tour it, HBO is a wonderful partner to the Apollo, and again, collaboration. They were very much interested in Between the World and Me, and so we were able to have it filmed, and it was shown on the HBO service, and it's still there. The other thing is, I want to just talk about the residency. The residency is an opportunity to have a relationship with an artist. It's an opportunity, it's a reciprocal relationship. It's a relationship where we allow the artist, again, to push the boundaries, but they also support the theater. We don't want to have a transactional relationship with an artist. We want to be able to work with them, be a part of the progress of a work. We want them to bring their proteges to the Apollo, and that's how we begin to develop relationships with new artists that are maybe under the radar. And what I like to tell people is that we talk about these legends back in the 30s and 40s and 50s who were graced the Apollo stage, but they weren't necessarily legends at that time. It's the fact that they had the opportunity to appear on the stage and hone their skills. So now we want to introduce a new body of work from young people who maybe haven't gotten to the point where they have taken off, but we are confident that they will. Another example of collaboration in the work that we're doing now is a partnership that we have with the National Black Theater and the American Composers Orchestra to present something called The Gathering and a collective sonic ring shot. Ring shot is, you know, a ritual that was enjoyed by folks who actually, I shouldn't say enjoyed, by practice by enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and the United States. So this will be 3 works under this. And one of the ones that we're really excited about is the premiere of The 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. And it's anchored by an 80-member orchestra and a 50-person choir composed of singers and professionals and amateurs from multiple African-American churches and choral ensembles. The 7 last words are the last words of African-Americans who were shot by police at different points across the country. Again, this is an opportunity to talk about or address some of the topical issues affecting our community, but, you know, America. And so through art, I think it's storytelling is a really important way to get these conversations to begin, to be able to address some of the issues that we're currently focusing on. The other thing, collaboration takes the form of the one that we have with SiriusXM. SiriusXM, and I happen to sit on the Sirius board, and Sirius brings some of the concerts to the Apollo and with artists that you wouldn't normally think about appearing at the Apollo. They've brought Bruce Springsteen, they've brought Paul McCartney, they've brought James Taylor. And then recently they brought Alicia Keys, and she is someone we have a relationship with, but that was an amazing performance. So I'm really excited about that because I think that we'll be doing more concerts like that. And that's the way we launched or relaunched beginning in August after COVID, so that we could test the waters and see, you know, how people felt about coming back to a theater.
So Jonelle, you left out one important point when you were talking about HBO. You collaborated with HBO on the Apollo documentary and won an Emmy for that. So, which I think, if not the first, certainly one of the few theaters that have run an Emmy about a documentary about themselves. And so I just want people to know that it was a remarkable accomplishment. So let's move on a little bit to talk about kind of the impact the Apollo has in the Harlem community and the Black community in general as an economic and cultural driver, and kind of how you anchor the community and impact other cultural institutions in the neighborhood.
The Apollo has, as I said earlier, the Apollo has always been a beacon for the community. It's been an economic driver. Even back when the theater looked like it was boarded up, like it was dark, the tourist buses would come up to 125th Street and they would stop in front of the theater. So in essence, the Apollo was the reason that tourism was taking place at that time. At that time, we had very few restaurants. We had 100 Frederick Douglass Boulevard, which is 8th Avenue, there was nothing there. And over a period of 10 years, there was a lot of development activity. And so one of the things that was really important, and one of the things that was lacking for the Apollo back then, was where can people go and have a meal or go have a drink before a show. I really needed to have this kind of community around me to provide, an opportunity for the tourists to get off the bus, see a show, and then, get something to eat. So that is how it began. And now it's very vital. I think that the Apollo, even back historically, the Apollo was the reason that people came to 125th Street, went to some of the stores and the restaurants in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, and certainly now in the 21st century. We are really excited because we are taking part in the Victoria Theater Redevelopment Project, which is a project that is a couple of doors to the east of the theater. And it's a mixed-use development. It is a development that has a hotel, residential property, and it will have retail, but it has cultural space. And the cultural space consists of 2 theaters, a 99-seat theater and a 199-seat theater, with the latest technology, advanced technology. And this will be an opportunity. The Apollo was designated, it's owned by the state, as is the Apollo. And the Apollo was designated as the manager of these spaces. And these spaces will provide an opportunity for us to encourage and engage and allow access for some of the local arts organizations. I think that as nonprofits and certainly cultural institutions in communities, that we have a responsibility to the community. And at the Apollo, we feel that we should really try to encourage some of the smaller arts organizations. I would say that after the pandemic, I mean, we're still in it, but the impact of it really changed the landscape. A lot of cultural organizations struggled, and some of them have actually closed down. But economically, we realized that they aren't going to be able to afford to rent space in the Victoria, and the space is going to can be used for rehearsal space or space to collaborate with other organizations in the community. And so to help the cultural ecosystem up there, we have gone on a real fundraising initiative to provide funding to subsidize the rental of these spaces for these smaller organizations, and also to initiate programs where they can become collaborators with the Apollo on some of the programming. So I'm really hoping, and I think it will, encourage smaller arts organizations to come utilize the space, but also to be able to showcase some of the work that is important to them.
So Jonelle, we have a question in the chat. As you talked a little bit about financials and the fundraising, the question was, can you talk about the financial constraints the theater faced through its expansion? And did you receive grants or donations? They're trying to get a sense of how do you fund it and where are you? And maybe it's a good point to talk about the capital campaign and renovating the theater as well.
So I have to say that I think the philanthropic community really stepped up during COVID. Let me just say, just like all cultural organizations and small businesses, we had some pretty difficult decisions to make. We were forced to furlough people. We had to lay some people off because the theater wasn't operating. and there was no revenue coming in. And so the only thing that we could really earned revenue coming in, the only thing that we really could depend on was a contributed revenue, fundraising. A number of the foundations, I would say that the Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation really stepped up and supported the Apollo as well as other organizations. And that was extremely helpful because they infused all of us with unrestricted funds, funds that we could use in the way that we needed them. So, you know, you could use it for your employees, you could use it to, you know, continue commissioning artists, which was very important to us because the artists were really hit by COVID. Most of them are, you know, they have no benefits. They're not working consistently, and so we really wanted to honor our commitments. So, in addition to the other foundations that supported the Apollo, really stepped up also. If they were supporting us, they either released the restrictions on the money or they increased the money that they had been giving us in support of programs. And then I have to say the federal government really did work this time for the cultural community. We certainly took advantage of the PPP, but also the initiative for saving the stages, which the Broadway and many of the other cultural organizations utilize. So between the fundraising and the support of the philanthropic community, meaning these larger foundations, we were able to stabilize the organization and to not have to worry about how we were going to, you know, pay our bills. Now we are at a point where I'm happy to say that we're financially stable. We've been able to bring employees back. And you know, I think that it worked. The infusion of money from the federal government and also the philanthropic community. We have we cut our budget. We now are we were on our way to being a $20 million organization, and this year we have a budget of roughly 14 million. So it's smaller, but we're in a growth spurt, and I think that we will continue to be conservative, but we will continue on with our plans for growth.
And what's the timing of the renovation of the main theater that people associate with? And then also like you to talk about, you know, corporate clients can buy out the Apollo and have certain events in different places. And so I think a lot of people just aren't aware that kind of they do that sometimes. So talk about that as well.
I love this, Charles, because you're focused on the business of the Apollo. So
I am what I am.
I'm happy to talk about that. First of all, you know, people may not think about the idea of renting the Apollo. We have a pretty robust rental or facilities rental program. We rent it out to corporations for their events. We can rent it out for, you know, dinners, anything. We have 2 spaces in the historic Apollo. That's the stage, the main stage. And then we have a black box on the 3rd floor of the theater for, you know, smaller events or different kinds of events that don't require the kind of seating that you have in a theater. We have been in a phased renovation project. We started back when I was referring to it earlier, where we renovated the exterior of the theater and did some infrastructural work. And then, later we did things like replace the seats. So it's been over a period of probably 15 years. We are now involved in a capital campaign which hasn't been announced, but it's a $65 million capital campaign, and we are almost there. We're shy. We're at 59 million, and we are actually going to probably increase the goal, because we feel like this is a real moment in time when we can continue to fundraise. This will be the final renovation of the theater, which will require the theater to close, but we have timed it out so that it would be closed during the summer. And if everything works, we wouldn't lose that much time. And the beauty of it is with the timing that the Victoria will open. It's scheduled to open in 2022, at the end of 22. And so we'll have space where we can program also. And that space that can also be rented. There are 2 spaces and they're smaller, so they can be used for different types of events. And so I would encourage anyone who happens to be listening to think of us in that vein.
So obviously the physical theaters is super important to the history. It made up the Apollo, but you did a lot online during the pandemic and probably learned a lot about how to stream and entertain people outside the theater. And so what are the lessons learned? Is that going to continue? Were you happy with what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Necessity is the mother of invention. For the Apollo only has 1,500 seats, which is why we're a not-for-profit. There's no way that we could compete in the commercial arena with such a small capacity. And so we had been thinking, we had done a strategic plan that focused on where we saw ourselves over the next 5 years. And being in the digital space was one of the pillars of the strategic plan. Well, when COVID hit, we had to pivot right away, as did all cultural organizations. And so we began to offer programming online. We felt it was really important to continue to be, in the lives of our constituents. And at the time when we pivoted, we began to go into our archives and provide programming that actually was relevant to what was going on, because we have a series called Uptown Hall, which are conversations. And, there were conversations about the police, and there were conversations that focused on the political situation. And so those were online, as well as, entertainment, cultural offerings. And then we began to produce programming specifically to be put on the digital stage. We called it the Apollo Digital Stage. And because in the summer, the mayor lifted some of the restraints and allowed work to be done in the theater, but no live audience, with distancing and testing. And so we were able to offer programming that was new, was fresh. The thing that I think that we are trying to figure out, and I think it's something that many people are trying to figure out, is how to monetize that programming. That's something that we are looking into and trying to focus on. What do we need to do that will create the sort of the interest in the programming, so that people would be willing to pay for it. The beauty of the digital stage is certainly the reach, the ability to go beyond your four walls. We found that we had people viewing our programming from all across the country and internationally. And so I think that there's definitely a paradigm shift that you're going to be seeing more of this, and we will certainly continue to be on the digital stage. We're on the digital stage now as we speak. But the other thing that we've been looking at, and you know, Charles, because we actually had a meeting with an individual that has a company that is really putting together, I guess, a syndicate of movie theaters that will be in place across the country, where we could think about putting our programming in to these theaters so that audiences in these different regions of the country would be able to see the programming at the same time as the live programming at the Apollo. Obviously, if it's taped, it could be seen later, but I think it's probably interesting to be able to be a part of what's going on while in real time. And so I think that we'll be looking into that. Another thing as we think about the future is, and that's why expansion is so important, to be able to have the space to do some new things. You know, we're looking at perhaps having a recording studio at the Apollo, or at least the technology that would allow some recording to be done. The other thing is, we've long thought that, you know, well, I would say that a lot of the tourists who come to the Apollo are from Asia, and specifically Japan. So we actually have a deal with a broadcast company in Japan, and they had to stop during the pandemic, but they were putting on their version of Amateur Night in Japan. I think that there would be real interest in, you know, programming over there, being able to take our digital programming, but also we're looking at perhaps having a presence in another country. So that's something that's on our radar. The other thing that I think is important is that it's an opportunity, again, to collaborate with other venues or other organizations in other city. The logical city for us at the moment would be Los Angeles. And we actually have a board member from Los Angeles. And we do think of ourselves as a national organization. And so through some of the conversations that we've been having with people in the entertainment community, I think that there's an opportunity to do some things out there and to have a presence. I see Barbara.
That's usually our signal, but so that probably brings us to a close. But Jonelle, thank you so much for sharing all that. The future for the Apollo just sounds exciting and bright. And that's a partial list of the things she's working on, ideas of ways to monetize the brand and take it different places. And whether you're in Tokyo or Paris or London, they know what the Apollo is. And so we have a global brand we want to take advantage of. But thanks again for sharing that with the audience. And I'll turn it back over to Barbara.
Right. Jonelle, you're amazing, really, and so inspirational. And Charles, thank you so much as well for taking time to join us today. So I'm pleased to say we have a few more prominent speakers lined up before the end of the year, and we encourage you, of course, to attend and invite your guests. Next up, we have Carla Harris, Vice Chairman, Global Wealth Management and Senior Client Advisor at Morgan Stanley. And she is going to discuss her incredible career trajectory and learnings around how she shaped her passion for leading and mentoring. On the same day, December 7th in the afternoon, we have Ken Benson, the President and CEO of SIFMA, and Dr. Lindsay Piazza, the Chair of the Economic Roundtable, and SIFMA Chief Economist with Stifel Financial. They'll be on at 1 o'clock, and they're going to reveal the results of SIFMA's latest U.S. economic survey. So that should be pretty exciting. We are looking forward to our first in-person hybrid event featuring Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, on December the 9th. And she's going to be discussing, she's just returned from a trip abroad where she was involved in a lot of important discussions. She's going to share insights around the supply chain issues, insights around the administration's efforts to strengthen business ties around the world, as well as steps to spur U.S. economic and job growth. Kathy Wood, the CEO and Chief Investment Officer of ARK Invest, is going to be in a conversation with us with Art Laffer, the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, on December 13th. And they're going to talk about Kathy's approach to the markets and her interest in many, many cutting edge technologies. And then we're going to wrap up on the 14th of December with Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, the president of Spelman College. And she will discuss her perspective on leadership and passion for advancing the next generation of Black entrepreneurs in her role at one of the top historically Black colleges. If you'd like to join us as a guest, or if you did join and you're interested in learning more about membership in the club, please email the club at the address shown there on the screen. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to recognize those of our 343 members of the Centennial Society joining us today, as their contributions continue to be the financial backbone of support for the club. And again, thank you everyone that joined us, and please stay healthy and safe. And we hope to see you at our next event. Thank you, Jonelle. Thank you, Charles.